Have you ever been judged not for who you are, but for the color of your skin? Imagine walking into the home of the man you love, only to be told you don't belong at his family's table. That's exactly what happened to me. This is the story of how I was humiliated, pushed aside, and nearly broken until the moment my father, a man more powerful than anyone in that room, walked through the doors and changed everything. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about dignity, courage, and learning to stand tall when the world tries to make you small. Before we dive into the full story, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss more powerful stories like this. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below because your voice matters here. Now, let's begin. My name is Cecilia Buckman, and if you had told me years ago that I would one day be engaged to Zuckerberg Anderson, the man every woman in the city seemed to secretly adore, I would have laughed in disbelief. I wasn't born into wealth or aristocracy. My father may have built an empire, but he raised me to live grounded, far from the entitled airs of high society. I grew up valuing kindness more than status, compassion more than money. Maybe that's why when Zuckerberg came into my life, I loved him not for his name, but for his heart. I still remember the night he proposed, clearer than any photograph. It wasn't in some glittering ballroom or under the flash of cameras like people might expect from a man like him. No, it was simple, real. We had taken a walk in the park near my apartment. The night air was crisp, and golden lights from the street lamps stretched across the pathway. I was teasing him about his terrible attempt at cooking pasta earlier that week when he suddenly stopped walking. "Cecilia," he said, his voice softer than usual, "do you know what I see when I look at you?" I laughed nervously. "Someone who needs to teach you how to boil spaghetti properly?" But then he dropped to one knee, right there on the gravel path, and my laughter died in my throat. In his hand was a velvet box, its hinges catching the light. Inside, a ring sparkled, but I hardly saw it. All I could see was his face, nervous but overflowing with love. "You're my home," he whispered. "Will you marry me?" My breath caught. The world slowed. I thought of all our moments, our laughter in the rain, his gentle patience when I doubted myself, the way he always held my hand like it was something sacred. And so, through tears I hadn't even realized were falling, I said yes. That moment should have been pure bliss. And in many ways, it was. We laughed, we kissed, and we danced awkwardly on the empty path, just two souls drunk on love. But even as my heart soared, a shadow crept in. I thought of his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson. Aristocrats, people of old money, people whose worlds were painted in pale shades only. Zuckerberg had warned me before. "My family can be complicated," he admitted once. "But trust me, Cecilia, they'll come around. They'll see you the way I do." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe love could conquer centuries of prejudice and cold tradition. Yet somewhere deep inside, I feared that the day I met his family would shatter the fragile dream I was holding on to. Still that night, I clung to joy. He was mine, and I was his. Whatever storms were waiting ahead, we would face them together. Or so I hoped. After the glow of the proposal, life felt like a dream. Everywhere I went, people noticed the sparkle on my finger. Some strangers offered smiles and congratulations, while others raised their brows, whispering as though the sight of a black woman wearing such a ring was somehow unusual. At work, my colleagues gathered around me in the break room. My best friend Lillian squealed and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Girl, you did it! You're marrying Anderson!" she shouted, making the others laugh. But not everyone's reaction was warm. One of my coworkers, Trisha, leaned against the counter with a smirk. The Andersons, as in the Andersons, the old money family who hosts that annual gala. I hear they're very particular. Particular, I repeated, narrowing my eyes. You know, she said with a shrug, about who they mix with, who sits at their table. The words pricked me like needles. Another colleague chimed in, I read once that Mrs. Anderson is obsessed with heritage. She wanted Zuckerberg to date a senator's daughter. I forced a laugh. Well, he chose me. They nodded, but the air shifted. Their smiles were tight, their voices cautious, like they were trying to prepare me for something I didn't want to face. That evening, I sat with Lillian at a small cafe, stirring my tea until it went cold. She reached across the table, her eyes soft. Cecilia, you know I love you, and I know Zuckerberg loves you. But his family, they're not like your father. They won't see you for who you are. They'll see only what they want to see. I sighed. Do you think I haven't thought about that? Every night, Lillian, it crosses my mind. But what am I supposed to do? Walk away from the man who makes me feel like I belong in this world just because his parents are blind to mine? She squeezed my hand. No, you fight for your happiness. Just don't walk in there unprepared. Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, when I lay in bed beside Zuckerberg, I turned to him. Do you ever wonder what your family will say about me? His eyes softened. He brushed a curl from my face and whispered, Cecilia, I don't care what they say. I chose you. I'll choose you every single time. And though his words soothed me, a part of me couldn't silence the whisper of doubt. Because love could shield us, yes, but could it silence an entire legacy of prejudice waiting behind the doors of his family's mansion? The first time I came face to face with Mrs. Anderson, it wasn't at a gala or dinner table. It was at the art gallery downtown. Zuckerberg and I had planned a quiet afternoon admiring an exhibition of African sculptures. He was midway through explaining how one of the pieces reminded him of my strength when I felt her presence before I even saw her. A chill, like a sudden draft, swept across my skin. I turned, and there she was. Tall, elegant, her hair swept into a perfectly styled bun. Pearls clung to her neck, and her tailored suit looked as though it had been custom-made in Paris. Her eyes found mine, and in that instant I felt like a specimen being examined under glass. Zuckerberg, she said smoothly, though her smile never reached her eyes. What a surprise. Mother, he replied, his voice clipped but steady. He slipped his arm protectively around my waist. This is Cecilia, my fiancé. The word seemed to slice the air. For a moment, her expression didn't change. Then she tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into something that was supposed to be a smile. Fiancé, she repeated, as though testing how the word tasted on her tongue. Her eyes swept over me from head to toe, lingering on my dress, a simple navy blue shift I'd chosen for its quiet elegance. What a brave choice, she remarked softly. Brave. The word stung. Brave as if I had dared to wear something unfitting for their world. Brave as if my very presence was an act of rebellion. I forced a smile. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Anderson. Your son speaks very highly of you. Her brows lifted ever so slightly, as though surprised I had spoken. Does he? She murmured, then shifted her gaze back to him. We'll be seeing you soon, won't we, at the family dinner? Zuckerberg stiffened. Of course, and Cecilia will be with me. Her smile thinned. Naturally. And with that, she turned gracefully and disappeared into the crowd, leaving the faint scent of expensive perfume behind her. I stood frozen, my heart thudding in my chest. My fingers clutched the strap of my purse until my knuckles turned white. Brave? I whispered. Zuckerberg kissed my temple. Ignore her. That's her way of testing people. She wants to see if you'll flinch. But the truth was, I had flinched, inside. Her gaze had pierced deeper than any insult could. I realized then that the whispers of doubt I'd been hearing weren't just paranoia, they were warnings. For the first time, I wondered if my love story wasn't just about two people, but about fighting against an entire fortress of prejudice built long before I was born. A week after that unsettling encounter at the gallery, the invitation arrived. It came in a heavy white envelope, embossed with the Anderson family crest in gold. The kind of paper you almost felt guilty for touching with bare hands. Zuckerberg handed it to me at my apartment one evening, his eyes a mixture of excitement and caution. "It's time," he said simply. I held it delicately, as though the envelope itself might burn me. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the invitation. The calligraphy was flawless, the words rehearsed by generations of tradition. "The Anderson family requests the honor of your presence at the annual Anderson dinner." The moment I read my name written beneath Zuckerberg's, my throat tightened. I had always known this moment would come, but seeing it in ink made it real. "They want me there," I whispered. "They'll get to see you," Zuckerberg corrected gently. "The real you, not the lies they've created in their heads." I tried to smile, but my nerves trembled beneath my skin. What if I'm not what they want to see?" He pulled me into his arms and pressed his forehead to mine. "It's their loss. I don't need their approval. I need you." Despite his words, a pit of dread sat heavy in my stomach. That night, I called my father. He was halfway across the world, attending a summit for his company, but he answered on the first ring. His deep voice instantly wrapped me in comfort. "Daddy, I got invited to the Anderson dinner," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause. "So it begins," he murmured. Then his voice strengthened. "Listen to me, Cecilia. Do not walk into that mansion with your head bowed. You are my daughter. You carry dignity in your blood. You don't need their acceptance. You carry your own table." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "But what if they—" He cut me off gently. They will judge. They will whisper, but their judgment cannot define you. Remember who you are. And remember this, if they do not honor you, they do not deserve you." Tears blurred my eyes as I whispered, "I wish you could be there." "I am always there," he said firmly, "even when you don't see me." When the call ended, I sat on my bed clutching the invitation. It felt less like a request and more like a summons, a test I hadn't asked for but would have to face. And deep down I knew this dinner wouldn't just be about food and tradition. It would be the night everything between me and the Andersons would be decided. The night of the dinner arrived quicker than I expected. I had spent hours choosing my dress, finally settling on a long emerald green gown that clung gently at the waist and flowed elegantly to the floor. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it was me. Simple, graceful, confident, even if my insides felt like a trembling mess. Zuckerberg arrived to pick me up in his sleek black car, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. "You look breathtaking," he said, pressing a kiss to my hand. "Remember, you're walking in there with me. Nothing else matters." But it did matter. I could already feel it. As we drove up the long, winding path to the Anderson estate, my chest grew tighter. The mansion loomed ahead, bathed in golden light. Its white stone walls stretched into the sky, guarded by towering columns and sprawling lawns. Cars lined the driveway, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, even a vintage Aston Martin. Every detail screamed old money. When we stepped out, I could feel eyes already following us. Servants dressed in crisp uniforms opened the doors, bowing politely, but eyeing me curiously, as though silently asking what business I had there. Zuckerberg squeezed my hand as we stepped into the grand foyer. The air smelled faintly of roses and expensive wine. A massive crystal chandelier sparkled above, scattering light across marble floors so polished they mirrored our steps. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, stern faces painted in oil, gazing down like silent judges. I clung tighter to his hand. My smile felt plastered, rehearsed. "Relax," he whispered. "You belong here as much as anyone else." But the moment we entered the dining hall, the room fell silent. Dozens of heads turned in unison, every conversation halting mid-sentence. Forks paused above plates. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. It was like walking into a courtroom where I was the accused. Mrs. Anderson was the first to speak, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. "Zuckerberg," she said coolly, her eyes locked on me. "You didn't tell us you'd be bringing her." The word "her" landed heavy. "She's not just her, Mother," Zuckerberg said firmly. He slipped his arm protectively around me. "She's my fiancé, soon to be your daughter-in-law." A murmur rippled across the table. Some relatives stared openly, others exchanged whispers behind delicate hands. My skin prickled under their scrutiny. And, though I forced my back straight and lifted my chin, inside I felt like I was balancing on the edge of a cliff, with their stares pushing me closer and closer to the fall. The silence lingered after Zuckerberg's declaration, heavy enough to press against my chest. I forced myself to stand tall, to smile politely, though inside every nerve in my body screamed for me to run. Mrs. Anderson's lips curled into the faintest semblance of a smile, sharp, controlled, and hollow. "Fiancé," she repeated, as if tasting a bitter flavor. "Well, what a surprise!" Her words dripped with venom, though cloaked in civility. A cousin, seated near the far end of the table, leaned toward another, whispering something that made them both chuckle behind raised wine glasses. An older uncle stroked his chin, not even bothering to hide the way he scrutinized me from head to toe. A young woman, my age, Zuckerberg's cousin, I later learned, smirked openly, her eyes rolling as if my presence was an insult to the very air they breathed. Still, I smiled, I nodded. I greeted them one by one as Zuckerberg introduced me. My voice was steady, but my palms were slick with sweat. We sat at the grand oak table, its surface polished to perfection, set with crystal glasses and gleaming silverware. Servants glided in and out, laying plates of roasted lamb, fragrant potatoes, and delicate salads before us. I thanked them each time, earning odd looks from family members who seemed far too accustomed to treating staff as invisible. I tried to join the conversations around me. I complimented Mrs. Anderson on the decor, which truly was stunning, but she merely nodded curtly and shifted the conversation to the antique vase she purchased in Italy. When I asked an uncle about his vineyard, he replied in clipped sentences before turning back to a cousin beside him. Each attempt I made was brushed aside, as if my voice didn't carry weight at this table. The air was thick with unspoken judgment. I could feel it crawling across my skin. The way their eyes lingered a moment too long, the way their smiles stretched but never softened. At one point, I excused myself quietly to dab my hands with the napkin, my stomach churning. Zuckerberg leaned close, whispering, "Don't let them get to you. You're doing beautifully." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to his words like a lifeline. But across the table, his mother was watching me with eyes that saw not Cecilia the woman, nor Cecilia the fiancée, but Cecilia the outsider. And though no one had yet said the words aloud, I could feel them building, waiting, like a storm on the horizon. The clinking of silverware filled the air, but to me it sounded like hammers striking nails into a coffin. My coffin, the coffin of my dignity. I tried to focus on the food before me, perfectly roasted lamb, delicately seasoned potatoes, and a salad that looked like art more than nourishment. But I had no appetite. My stomach twisted as if it knew something cruel was about to be served that had nothing to do with food. Conversation resumed around me, though it flowed like a river that parted whenever I tried to step in. "So, Cecilia," a cousin finally said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "where did you go to school?" I smiled, grateful for the question, and answered, "I graduated from Boston University with a degree in international business." "Oh, how interesting," she said, her lips curving but her eyes hard. "That's very practical." The way she said it was almost dismissive, as though practicality was beneath the grandeur of their Ivy League pedigrees. Another relative leaned in, his tone casual but his words sharp. "And what does your family do, Cecilia, if you don't mind me asking?" I hesitated. My father's empire was vast, but I had never worn his wealth like a crown. "My father runs several companies," I said simply. Mrs. Anderson's fork paused midair. "Several companies?" she echoed, her tone neutral but laced with disbelief. "How ambitious." Ambitious. That word landed like brave had earlier. It wasn't a compliment. It was a test. I offered a polite smile. "Yes, he's worked hard his whole life." Zuckerberg squeezed my hand under the table, his silent reassurance warming me, but the smirks around the table were impossible to ignore. Then, one of the younger cousins, clearly emboldened by the atmosphere, leaned back and said with a chuckle, "Well, I suppose ambition is necessary when you don't have tradition to fall back on." The table erupted in soft laughter, polite, rehearsed, but sharp enough to slice my composure. My throat tightened. I felt heat rising up my neck, but I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. I said, "Tradition is important, but so is building something meaningful in the present." The laughter dimmed, and a few relatives looked down at their plates, but Mrs. Anderson didn't flinch. She only sipped her wine, her eyes steady on me like a hawk circling prey. I realized then that these weren't conversations. They were weapons, polished, sharpened, dipped in honey, but deadly all the same. And I was sitting at the center of their battlefield. The laughter faded, replaced once again by the sharp clinking of silverware. For a moment, I thought maybe the worst had passed, that perhaps I had survived the gauntlet of polite insults. But then Mr. Anderson cleared his throat, the sound commanding silence like a gavel striking wood. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers curled loosely around a crystal glass of wine. His gaze was fixed on me, cold and unflinching. "Cecilia," he said, drawing out my name as if testing its weight on his tongue, "perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the other room." The words sank slowly, like poison seeping into my bloodstream. "The other room?" I asked, my voice soft, though I already knew what he meant. "Yes," he continued smoothly, "this table is reserved for family. Surely you understand. It's nothing personal, of course, just tradition." The room froze. Forks hung in the air, glasses hovered just short of lips. Even the servants paused mid-step, their eyes darting nervously. Zuckerberg's fork clattered loudly onto his plate. "Father!" he snapped, his voice sharp with anger. "What are you saying?" Mr. Anderson didn't flinch. "I'm saying what I've always said. We do not mix outsiders with family matters. It's simply how it's always been. Surely Cecilia, with her practicality, can respect that." I felt my face flush, the sting rising from my chest to my throat. Outsider. That was what I was to them. Not a woman, not a fiancé, not someone their son loved. Just an outsider, unworthy of their table. Mrs. Anderson leaned forward, her tone sugar-coated, but no less venomous. "Yes, dear, don't take it personally. We have a certain way of doing things. You wouldn't want to dishonor tradition, would you?" I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to demand they see me for who I was. But my father's voice echoed in my mind. "You carry your own table." So I inhaled deeply, steadying the tremble in my voice. "If my presence dishonors your tradition, then I won't force myself at your table." The room was silent, except for the pounding of my heart in my ears. I stood slowly, pushing back my chair, its legs scraping loudly against the polished floor. I didn't look at them. I couldn't. My eyes burned with unshed tears, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. I turned towards the hallway, each step heavy, each breath sharper than the last. Behind me, I heard Zuckerberg's chair scrape violently against the floor. His voice thundered through the hall. "You should be ashamed of yourselves." But I didn't stop, because in that moment, all I could do was hold myself together, one step at a time. I hadn't made it 3 steps into the hallway before I heard the scrape of a chair, the slam of silverware, and Zuckerberg's voice booming behind me. Enough. His words echoed through the cavernous dining hall, bouncing off the high ceilings and silencing even the boldest whispers. I froze, my back to them, my heart torn between wanting to flee and wanting to hear him defend me. "You embarrassed her," he said, his tone cutting, trembling with fury. "You embarrassed me. This is the woman I love, the woman I'm going to marry, and you treated her like some uninvited guest." Mrs. Anderson's voice rose, smooth but sharp. "Zuckerberg, lower your tone. This is not the place." "No, Mother," he roared, his voice raw. "This is exactly the place. You humiliated Cecilia in front of the entire family. Do you know what it took for her to walk through those doors tonight, knowing how you all might look at her? And then you proved her fears right." I turned slightly, enough to see him standing, his fists clenched at his sides, his face flushed with anger. He wasn't the calm, gentle Zuckerberg I knew. He was a man pushed past the edge, standing in the fire for me. Mr. Anderson leaned back in his chair, unbothered. "Son, you're blinded by emotion. Marriage is not about feelings, it's about legacy, and your legacy cannot be tied to what?" Zuckerberg snapped. His voice cracked like lightning. "Say it, Father. To her skin? To her not being one of your carefully chosen daughters of senators and aristocrats? You think love is something you arrange like place settings on this table?" Gasps rippled around the room. A few cousins shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us. Mrs. Anderson pressed a hand to her pearls, her lips pursed in silent fury. "This family has standards," Mr. Anderson said firmly, his voice a cold blade. "And I have mine," Zuckerberg shot back. He shoved his chair aside, the wood screeching against the polished floor. Silence. Crushing, suffocating silence. I wanted to run back and hold him, but I knew this wasn't my fight to finish. It was his. I had already endured enough humiliation for one night, so I stood in the hallway, trembling, swallowing back tears, and whispering to myself, "Don't break. Don't let them see you break." I didn't know then that someone else was about to walk through those doors, someone whose very presence would shatter the Andersons' pride into pieces. My heels clicked softly against the marble as I moved farther down the hallway, each step carrying the weight of humiliation. My throat burned, my eyes stung, but I kept whispering to myself, "Hold it together, Cecilia, not here, not in front of them." And then it happened. The heavy front doors of the mansion burst open with a deep, echoing sound that silenced the world around me. Conversations halted. Even the servants froze. A chill rippled down my spine, and I turned slowly. There he was, my father, Mr. Buckman. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence filling the entire entranceway. He wore a tailored navy suit that caught the glow of the chandeliers, polished shoes clicking against the marble as he stepped inside. His eyes, sharp, commanding, scanned the room like a man accustomed to power, a man who had built empires with nothing but his will and refused to bow to anyone. And yet, when his gaze found me, his face softened, if only for a heartbeat. "Good evening," he said, his deep voice booming across the hall. It wasn't just a greeting, it was a statement. Authority laced every syllable, the kind of voice that made men pause and reassess themselves. Gasps rose from the dining hall. I saw cousins craning their necks to catch sight of him, whispers already spreading like wildfire. Mr. Anderson's face drained of color. His wineglass shook in his hand, the liquid trembling dangerously close to spilling. Mr. Buckman? He stammered, his voice suddenly small. My father stepped further into the hall, his eyes narrowing. I hear my daughter was told she doesn't belong here. The words cracked through the silence like a whip. I had never seen an entire room shrink so quickly. Shoulders sunk, heads dipped. Even Mrs. Anderson's perfectly practiced smile faltered, her lips parting as though she had been caught in a lie she couldn't defend. Zuckerberg rushed to my side, his arm slipping protectively around me. My father's gaze lingered on him for a brief moment before returning to Mr. Anderson. Save your excuses, he said, raising a hand before anyone could speak. I have sat at tables with presidents, kings, and world leaders. Not once has my daughter been treated as anything less than royalty. And yet here, in this house, among people who claim refinement, she was made to feel like a servant. The silence was deafening. My heart thudded, my knees weak, but pride swelled inside me. My father wasn't just defending me, he was lifting me, holding me higher than this table could. For the first time that night, I no longer felt small. The dining hall had turned into a theater of shame. My father stood tall at the doorway, his presence so commanding it made even the chandelier above seem to bow to him. Every eye in the room darted between him and Mr. Anderson, the so-called patriarch whose voice had only moments ago carried so much arrogance. Now he looked like a schoolboy caught red-handed. My father's words cut through the silence. Do you know who you insulted tonight? You think she's unworthy of your table because of the color of her skin? His voice thundered, but it wasn't loud for the sake of noise. It was loud with truth, with a weight no one could deny. He stepped forward, each stride echoing on the polished marble. Cecilia is more grace, more dignity, more brilliance than any of you could ever hope to claim. She carries herself with humility despite being my daughter. My daughter, the heir to an empire larger than your entire fortune. Gasps rippled around the table. Cousins who had smirked at me earlier now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I saw one of the uncles lower his eyes, suddenly fascinated with the edge of his napkin. Mr. Anderson swallowed hard, his voice unsteady. Mr. Buckman, we meant no disrespect. It's simply our family's tradition. My father snapped his hand up, silencing him mid-sentence. Tradition? Do not insult me by calling bigotry a tradition. You sit here in your fine clothes, sipping wine from crystal glasses, pretending that cruelty is culture. It is not. It is cowardice. Mrs. Anderson tried to interject, her voice trembling but still laced with pride. We didn't mean— Enough, my father cut in, his tone sharp. I've dealt with leaders of nations who understood dignity better than this household. If you truly value tradition, then learn this one, respect. Because without it, your wealth, your status, your so-called legacy, none of it matters. The room was dead silent. Even the servants had stopped moving, frozen by the weight of his words. Then my father turned to me, his voice softening like velvet after steel. Cecilia, you don't need this table. You never did. Anyone who cannot honor you is unworthy of your presence. Tears blurred my vision. For the first time that night, they weren't from humiliation. They were from pride, from the knowledge that no matter how this family saw me, my father saw me as enough, more than enough. Zuckerberg slid his arm tighter around me, his voice steady, almost a whisper. Now they see. And they did. The Andersons, with all their money, their marble floors, their chandeliers, they looked small, so very small. For the first time since I stepped into that mansion, I felt like I could breathe. My father's words hung in the air, powerful and immovable, like a verdict that no one dared to challenge. I looked around the table and saw the faces of people who had once looked down on me. Some couldn't even meet my gaze now. Others shifted uncomfortably, their smugness gone. The cousins, who had laughed at their own cruel jokes, stared into their plates, their cheeks flush red with shame. But the greatest change I saw wasn't in them. It was in me. I no longer felt like the outsider. I no longer felt like a guest who had to earn her place. My father's presence reminded me of something I had forgotten in the haze of nerves and insults. I carried my worth within me. I was not defined by their approval. Zuckerberg's hand found mine under the table, his grip firm and steady. He leaned closer, his voice low but full of conviction. "You are my fiancé, my partner, my future wife. That will never change." Tonight they saw what I've always seen. You are extraordinary. I squeezed his hand back, my throat tight with emotion. I wanted to speak, to thank him for standing by me, but my father's voice pulled me back into the moment. "Cecilia," he said, his tone softer now, almost tender, "you don't need their acceptance to shine. You carry your own light, and anyone fortunate enough to share your table should feel honored, not the other way around." Tears slipped down my cheeks, despite my effort to hold them back. I nodded, unable to form words, my heart swelling with gratitude. For a moment, the entire room seemed to fade. The chandeliers, the gilded walls, the stairs, all of it became background noise to the quiet truth my father had spoken into my soul. Zuckerberg rose slowly, still holding my hand. "If anyone here believes our love is up for debate," he said firmly, scanning the table, "then you are mistaken. Cecilia and I will marry with or without your blessing. That is not a question. It is a certainty." A hush swept through the hall. No one spoke. No one dared. And in that silence, I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation I had carried was gone, replaced by dignity, by strength, by a fierce pride that no insults could ever take from me again. That night, in the very place I had been belittled, I discovered something priceless. I did not need the Andersons to validate me. My dignity was already mine, and it had just been restored. After my father's thunderous rebuke and Zuckerberg's defiant stand, the air in the dining hall grew unbearably heavy. The silence wasn't the same silence I'd felt earlier, the suffocating one filled with judgment. This one was different. It was the silence of shame. I could see it in their faces. The cousins who had smirked when I stumbled over conversation now stared at their plates, their forks nudging bits of food they had no appetite for. The uncle who had questioned my family leaned back in his chair, his hands folded as though praying for the moment to pass. Mrs. Anderson was the first to break. She cleared her throat softly, her eyes avoiding mine. "Cecilia, dear," she said, her voice thin, almost brittle, "I think perhaps we may have been a bit harsh." A bit harsh? The words felt like a bandage slapped over a wound that was still bleeding. "I assure you," she continued, her eyes darting nervously between my father and her husband, "it was never our intention to make you feel unwelcome." Mr. Anderson chimed in next, his voice stripped of its earlier authority. Yes, of course, it was all a misunderstanding. We hold our traditions dearly, but perhaps we've misapplied them tonight." Misapplied, misunderstanding. Not once did they say we were wrong. I stared at them, my chest rising and falling slowly, my father's words echoing in my heart. A part of me wanted to lash out, to tell them their regret meant nothing, that their apologies felt like empty coins tossed into a well. But another part of me simply no longer cared. Zuckerberg spoke for me, his voice calm but cold. "You don't owe Cecilia excuses. You owe her respect. And until you can give that freely, without being cornered into it, your words mean nothing." His mother flinched, her lips pressed into a tight line. Mr. Anderson shifted in his chair, visibly shrinking under the weight of his son's disappointment. I let the silence stretch. For once, they were the ones uncomfortable, and I was the one holding the power. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady. I don't need apologies you don't mean. I have my dignity, my father's strength, and my fiancé's love. That's enough for me. The look on their faces told me everything. They weren't sorry for what they'd done. They were sorry they'd been exposed. And that, I realized, was their punishment. Later that night, after the mansion's golden lights had faded behind us, I sat in the back of the car with my father and Zuckerberg. The silence between us wasn't heavy like before. It was soothing, like a balm after a wound. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city blurred by in streaks of light. My dress still shimmered faintly in the reflection, but I no longer felt like the same woman who had walked nervously into that dining hall hours earlier. I felt stronger. When we reached my apartment, my father insisted on walking me inside. We sat together in the living room, the soft lamp casting warm light across his face. For once, the sharpness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something tender, almost vulnerable. You know, he began, folding his hands together, I didn't build everything I have to prove myself to the world. I built it because I knew there would be people who tried to make my children feel small, and I swore I'd give you the kind of shield I never had. His words sank deep. I blinked back tears and reached for his hand. You were my shield tonight, Daddy. If you hadn't walked in when you did, I don't know. He shook his head firmly. No, Cecilia, you were your own shield. I only reminded them who you are. You stood tall even when they tried to break you. That dignity, that strength, that was yours. My throat tightened. I wanted to believe him, and a part of me knew he was right. Zuckerberg, who had been quiet all this time, finally spoke. He sat on the edge of the couch, his eyes locked on mine. Cecilia, I promise you this. We will not let their table define our love. We'll build our own table, one where every person who sits at it knows they belong. The words hit me like a spark in the dark. My own table, a table not made of oaken arrogance, but of love, respect, and truth. I smiled softly, feeling warmth spread through me. Then that's the only table I want. We sat together in that small apartment, my billionaire father, my aristocratic fiancé, and me, a woman who had just learned that true wealth isn't measured in chandeliers or crystal glasses. It's measured in love, in respect, in the courage to choose your own table when others push you away. And that's how my story unfolded. From humiliation at a table that tried to cast me aside, to dignity restored, to love that stood firm, and to the moment I realized my worth was never theirs to give or take. But now, I want to hear from you. What's your opinion on this story? Do you think I did the best thing in that situation, or should I have made a different choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to know what you would have done if you were in my shoes. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful, life-changing stories like this one. Your support helps us bring more stories to light, and your voice in the comments makes this community stronger. Until next time, stand tall and never let anyone dim your light.